This is Rebecca, my sister.
Hi.
Excellent. Well, cool. I'm so excited to learn with you, Sam. So we'll learn a little Hasidut tonight too. That's great. Um,
Okay.
so um, let's get started. It's 9:15. Hello, Sam. Hello, my mom and sister on Zoom. Hello, everybody on YouTube. Um, as a reminder, I know it's Sam's first time at Hasidut, and I don't know how many first time it's on YouTube, but this is the book we're learning out of. It's called the Kedushat Levi, and it's the main work of Rabbi Levi Yitzchak Miberdichev. He was one of the early masters of Hasidic. He was one of the early Hasidic masters. Just to remind you, the way it works is you have generations. The very first rabbi was the Baal Shem Tov, born in 1700. And then his disciple was a rabbi named Dov Ber. And then Dov Ber was the one who really got the word out about Hasidut. And then Levi Yitzchak was one of those next rabbis in the third generation of Hasidut. So this is his book. And tonight we're going to read just two short, wonderful ideas that come from his commentary. So we'll jump right into it. And the first is a pretty practical mitzvah, but he reads it in a completely different way. And I'll start by maybe asking the question, and shalom again to Yochev on YouTube. But I'll start just by asking this question. What does it mean to have a spiritual safety net? How can you guarantee that you're not going to, completely collapse and fall under the weight, of reality, under the weight of being human? Being human is really tough. And, that's why Unatana Tokef that we'll read over the high holidays is all about the human struggle. We are frail. And there's times where we that we're brought up, that we have joy in our lives, and those the Kedushat Levi will talk about are actually kind of dangerous, because there's the possibility of a letdown. There's the possibility of getting too haughty, and so what are the kind of safety nets you can put in place to make sure that you aren't completely buried under the weight of being human? And so we have this mitzvah: Ki tivnei bayit chadash va'asita ma'akeh legagecha. When you build a new house, you shall put a parapet around your roof. Pretty simple mitzvah. When you build a house, you need to build on your roof a safety bar going all around to make sure that when somebody's up there, they don't fall off. But this is how he reads it. Haklalhu, he says, this is the general principle. Keshemagia la'adam eza simcha mahabore. When one has any kind of joy that comes from one's creator, az yireh ledaber diborim lahavin hasimcha ba'otiyot. One wishes to speak words in order to understand that simcha with letters. That is to say, one has a desire to say thank you. B'Torah u'b'tefila v'shirot v'tishbachot b'chdei ledabek hasimcha lemala baborei baruch hu. With studying Torah, with prayer, with songs of praise, in order to connect that joy upwards with God. And I'll mention he uses that word ledabek again from Deveikut in order to really to connect, not only on a personal level, but here he's saying even one's experiences. The goal is to connect them with God. And so you take that joy, and one's inclination is, or should be, he says, to connect that joy with God. V'zehu haremez. So this is what's hinted to in this verse. Ki tivnei bayit chadash. When you build a new house, keshemagi lecha simcha chadasha. That is to say, when you have a new kind of joy. Because, having a new house is joyful. He says, when you have that new kind of joy, Ba'asita ma'akeh la'alot hasimcha lamala al yedei otiyot. He says, build a parapet in order to raise that joy upwards. And then he says, but by way of otiyot, by way of letters. So what could he mean by this? He says, zehu ma'akeh. This is what we mean by a parapet. Ki hama'akeh yibaneh lamala lamala. Because the parapet is even above the highest point of the house. So you take the house, and then you raise it even higher by building that parapet on top of it. V'zehu haremez legagecha. And then we have the hint of the word legagecha, which means in Hebrew your roof. Kedei lahavin hasimcha ba'otiot. In order to bring that joy and express it with letters. Okay, so he's going to explain why is it that word legagecha, your roof, here is a hint to thanking God explicitly with words and with letters. He says, V'yadua, know this, ki koach hamana'anea bechola otiyot hu Hashem havaya. He says, the power of all the Hebrew letters. Don't forget, in the Kabbalistic science, the world was created through letters. Through the Aleph Bet, through the 22 letters. And he says the power of those letters come from God's name, Yud He Vav He. Haratzon ba'otiyot mishem havaya. All of the power, the desire of the letters, to create the world come from God's name. And this is what's hinted to in the word gagecha. The word gagecha, gimel chaf, in Gematria is esrim v'sheish, is 26, which is God's name. So he says, build a parapet on your roof. Build a parapet for your roof. That is to say, for your roof, what we really mean there is that which has the power from God's name, which are the letters. So he says, this is his how he interprets this verse. When you have any kind of joy, bring it higher by expressly thanking God for it in prayer, with Torah study, with praise. And I'll take it a step further. This, I feel like, is a safety net. When wonderful things happen to us, it's easy to forget. It's easy to forget that we could fall down from there. That there is the possibility of being brought low just as we're high. There's only one blessing in the whole Torah that there's only one blessing that we're commanded to bless from the Torah itself, and that is Birkat Hamazon, the blessing after meals. All the other blessings are of rabbinic origin, but Birkat Hamazon is the blessing from the Torah, because when we have joy, when we have what we need, when we're feeling haughty and high and lifted up, it's such a blessing. But we can forget up there. We can forget while we're feeling, so great, so haughty, so high up, so blessed. We can forget about God. We can forget that at some point we're going to be brought low again. And then it could be a danger to us. And so here he says, when you take your joy and you thank God for it, not only are you bringing your joy higher because you are expressly thanking your Creator, and you're taking this joy and you're making it into something eternal. You're connecting it to something bigger. It's also a safety net, so that way you remember that same Creator who gave you that joy also made you human. And, there's illness too. There's times when you're going to have a day that's just kind of, average. And then when you're up there, you can remember that. And then when you come down, you won't fall. You can walk down slowly. And you can be on your roof. You can stand at the very top of your joy and look out safely and feel, the height, of that blessing without falling down and getting hurt, so to speak. So that's spiritual safety net part 1. take that joy and build, that is to say, a metaphorical parapet, a safety bar on top of it. So that way you can stand on top of it, look out at the world, and not fall down and hurt yourself from the heights. Okay, I'm going to share just one more idea from this week's Parsha. Also part of the spiritual safety net. And this one, the question is, what is a sustainable way to do mitzvot? A second kind of spiritual safety net is, how can you observe our tradition in a way that is sustainable? Mitzvot are hard to do. There's no question about it. And how do you do it in a way that you don't burn out and you have a lifelong practice? That's what we're going to read here. So the verse, this comes from Deuteronomy chapter 24:13, and the mitzvah here is that if you loan money to somebody who is destitute and you take a pledge from them, we are commanded every single night to give that pledge back to the person who is destitute. We can't hold on to it. This is because, being so poor, they don't have a lot. And in fact, here the Torah even imagines that they have to give their own, warmest piece of clothing, which if you're living in, ancient Israel, that's probably the most expensive thing that this, pauper has. And so the Torah imagines, if you lend money to somebody who's destitute and they give you, their warmest piece of clothing, you have to give it back to them every single day. You can't keep it. The debtor cannot keep it. You have to give it back to the poor person every single day. And the Torah says, "Uverachecha ulecha tiye tzedakah lifnei Hashem Elohecha." And the person who is destitute, when you do this, he will bless you. And ulecha tiye tzedakah lifnei Hashem Elohecha. And to you, there will be tzedakah, there will be justice before Adonai your God. So that's the verse that the Kedusha Levi is going to talk about here. This destitute person will bless you, and to you there will be tzedakah. Va'ayin perush Rashi, and Rashi says v'nired leva'er kach. He explains it like this: Kishe yachzor hamashkon laoni. When you return the pledge to that destitute person, bevadai haoni yivarechoto. Certainly, that destitute person will bless you. V'nimtza efshar ya'aseh zot leman yivarech oto oni. And it might be found that it's possible that the debtor will do this specifically so that that poor person will bless him. Ulezeh levaer hapasuk. And for this, we explain this pasuk, this verse. Sha'al ya'aseh zot b'kavana hanizkar la'ayil. That one should not do this with this particular intention, that he or she should be blessed, by, this poor person. Rak ya'aseh l'ma'an Hashem. Rather, one should do this specifically for God's sake. V'lo yitzapeh levirkat ha'oni bishvil zeh. And one should not expect, this poor person to bless him on account of this. V'zehu haremez. And this is what's hinted to. Ulecha tiyeh hatzedakah. And to you there will be tzedakah. There will be justice. Ata ta'aseh hatzedakah hazot keshe ta'aseh hamitzvah. You will do this particular tzedakah when you do this mitzvah. Lifnei Hashem Elohecha, before Adonai your God. Perush, that is to say, keshe ta'aseh hamitzvah rak bishvil tzivui haborei yitzparach. That you do this mitzvah because God commanded it. V'lo bishvil birkat ha'oni. And not on account of the fact that this destitute person will bless you. So in the Torah, it looks like this is part of the grand blessing of this mitzvah, that you return this pledge to the person who is poor, and they will bless you. And the Torah, it looks like that's a promise here, but actually the Kedusha Levi reads it as a warning. He says, yes, this poor person will bless you, but you can't that can't be the intention with which you do this blessing. It's a warning to say, don't expect that. Even though that will happen, that's a wonderful thing. But the reason you do this is because lecha tziyeh tzedakah, says the Torah. To you there will be tzedakah. This is, I think, another kind of spiritual safety net in terms of the sustainability of mitzvot. Let's say that somebody, is a debtor, somebody, does lend money and, only gives back these pledges in order to receive, blessings from those to whom he lends money to or she lends money to. Once that stops happening, they're not going to return the pledges. Let's take it to a more relatable mitzvah. Let's say that you pray 3 times a day, only because you want to tell people you pray 3 times a day, and you like the praise, and you like it when people say, oh, so-and-so prays 3 times a day, isn't he great? Isn't she spiritual? Or you only wrap tefillin, specifically for, for the praise and honor that you receive from others. Here he says, it's very possible that you'll receive such praise, that you'll receive blessing from others for doing mitzvot. But if that's the reason that you're doing mitzvot, it's not going to last. The reason for doing a mitzvah needs to come from your own sense of tzedakah before God. That is to say, when you do a mitzvah, you don't do it for others. You do it because lecha tziyeh tzedakah. To you, you are living a life of justice, a life of mitzvot, and it's about your relationship with God. Very simple. If you do mitzvot because you like the praise and blessing you receive from others, it's not going to last. But if you do it because you want to live a life of justice, a life of truth with God, connecting your actions, connecting your joy, as we said before, connecting those mundane moments even with God, then you create a spiritual life that's sustainable. So 2 different kinds of spiritual safety nets. One, taking those joyous moments and giving God some credit in order to bring them higher, and then not be lost in the joy of a blessing. And then the second is living a life of mitzvot, not because you get blessing or praise from others, but because that is your own personal connection with God. And it's building that relationship with God and living a life of truth and justice. So with that, I'll pause for a moment before we sign off if there are any questions, comments, concerns. I know it's a shorter class tonight, but in my defense, the Kedushat Levi's comments on Ki Teitze are also somewhat sparse. It's just a page. Okay, Yochev, I see your comment. And I'll translate it from Portuguese. Okay, Yochev shares this beautiful thought. She says, there are joys that are difficult to explain because they are felt. They're internal, I think Yochev means. To be safe on the roof is to be in the arms of God. The approach to the eternal is materialized in the fulfillment of the mitzvot. Thank you, Yochev. I can always trust on you for a beautiful blessing at the end. Oh, and there's more from Yochev. Hold on, and I'll translate that too. One of these words was not translated, but it'll say, Yosef says, doing justice attracts justice. So doing mitzvot brings on more mitzvot. Yeah, we see that in Pirkei Avot too. Mitzvah goreret mitzvah. Mitzvah brings another mitzvah. Not just in your own life, but also you become kind of a mitzvah magnet, almost, according to Yochev. When you do a mitzvah, then others too will do mitzvot around you. Okay, so with that, Oh, yes. Do you have, Mom, do you have something you were going to say?
Yeah, I was just thinking that one of the things that's really interesting is that um, the idea of the parapet almost like kind of challenges a person, I think, to like stretch and reach higher. That and that it's interesting because there was once a can't remember, I was at some seminar or something, and the professor was talking about having somebody like reach really high, and he said to the audience, he said, I want everybody to raise their hand, and everybody put their hand up, and then he said, now I want you to raise it higher. And so everybody had reached their hand up, and it's so interesting because why don't when you put your hand up, why don't you just naturally reach higher? And everybody in the room was able to even reach higher.
Yeah.
After the initial reach your
I
hand
love
up.
that.
Yeah.
Yeah, you can always
And
yeah, and that's
it's a fun thing to do with in the classroom too.
sure.
Everybody reach
Yeah,
out,
that's a great story. That's part of this mitzvah too. Is it's saying there's a way to bring your joy even higher.
Yeah.
Yeah, and the way to bring your joy higher is connecting it to God, connecting it to a mitzvah. Bringing it from just this world and connecting it to something that is lasting, something that's eternal. Okay. We'll sign up for tonight. Shavua Tov, everybody. Thank you for joining us. Yochev, thanks for joining us on YouTube, and everybody else who was watching. Sam, Mom, thanks for joining us on Zoom. We'll sign off now. Bye, everybody.